Motive Talks has recently been selected as a finalist at the New York Times podcast competition. Thank you for all of your amazing support. What makes a scholar? Perhaps it's the research they do. Or maybe it's the way their research has contributed to society. But what if it's the way they have defied the odds to get to where they are? STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics work has experienced exponential growth since the blowout of the computer empire in the 1980s. In fact, the Pew Research Center has reported that STEM occupations have grown 79% since 1990, from 9.7 million to 17.3 million, drastically outpacing overall American job growth. Unfortunately, not much has changed for the people on the margins, and fighting for a place in the STEM world continuously proves to be an uphill battle. Let's hear from some of their stories. Okay, so my name is Maxine. I'm 17 years old, and I don't really have a very concrete relationship with STEM because I'm more of a humanities person, but I always have to interact with STEM because I'm involved in a lot of what modern divergence has to do.
My name is Maham and I'm 16, and I'm partially in STEM in the way that I definitely want to go through the pre-med and medical track, and I've taken STEM classes.
Hi, my name is Bunmi, and I'm 16 years old, and recently I have completely removed myself from STEM. Most of my upbringing, I've done STEM-related activities, such as MESA and other engineering programs, but recently, especially as we get closer to college, I've realized that I don't want to have a career in STEM and that I more enjoy things having to do with politics and other humanities.
My name is Ore. I'm 17 years old. I've always enjoyed math, and I've fallen in and out of love with other STEM fields through the years, but I do want to get involved with public health in the future.
Hi, I'm Ray. I'm 17. Over the course of my high school career, I've done a lot of STEM activities, including science fair, invention conventions, and other coding stuff.
Hi, my name is Faith, and I'm 16 years old. I hope to major in biomedical engineering, but I have had a lot of experience in STEM. This summer, I've been doing 3 coding summer programs, and I've had a lot of experience just doing like coding competitions and just kind of like finding a way to combine both health science and also technology, since they're both my interests.
All right, so in today's podcast, we'll be discussing some of the ways that minorities have been treated in STEM throughout history, some of the social implications behind this treatment, and how our mission in neurodiversity might help change this course for them. So, as far as I know, everybody in this podcast right now is a minority in some way, shape, or form. And I was just wondering how that might have impacted your relationship with STEM.
Yeah, so like I was saying, I'm doing Code with Clossie this summer, and we have something called a culture and tech session. Recently, we talked about how there have been a lot of accidents that have happened in STEM because of the lack of diversity. So for example, like the first airbags and stuff like that, they were created only by men and only men tested them out. So a lot of women were endangered. They were really hurt during the process because, just physically, they didn't really make the airbags and all that protection stuff to fit women. And somebody also brought up how iPhones with face recognition, they only work for Americans, so it doesn't work as well in countries like Asia because of the lack of diversity that they have for people working with those kind of technology stuff. So I'd say that personally it has impacted me because it's kind of like just being like the only Black person in the class, for example. It can be hard being the only woman in a class learning about STEM. They can feel isolated personally, but I'm sure a lot of people have had the same experience.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to being the only Black person in the class or being one of the only females in the class. And it was always something that whenever I was in advanced science or math classes, it was always just recognized that the guys would be into computer science and the girls would be into biology. And I don't know if anyone else can relate to that, but that was always how it was.
I mean, I think I relate to that super hard. I think all the girls are leaning towards biology a lot, and I think the guys are like more physics orientated or whatever. But I think it's good that we're trying to challenge it, and I think it creates an environment which doesn't allow women to thrive when there's this kind of preconditioned stereotype about the different types of sciences that women are allowed to take at this current moment.
Yeah, I say that particularly when it comes to being a minority and female, it's kind of like you have two strikes against your back. I moved from a different county to where I live now in 8th grade, and because of that, I was a bit more advanced in my math classes, and so I had to take math. It was geometry at the time, in a library with only two other kids. And when I would talk to my friends, or at least the new friends I was making, usually most of them were male, they would always be surprised that I was in a math above them, and they would kind of make these microaggressions like, oh, wow, you're so good at math, as if it was astounding that a Black girl could be in a higher math class. And I still continue to see that now that I'm in higher math classes in high school now. And it's kind of like I said before, you have two strikes against your back, and in some places you might not have a lot of support to cultivate your interest in STEM.
I think on the other hand, my school is vastly different in that we're very, very competitive, and I think we care a lot less about gender and STEM. You can see that there was one specific video that was very, very popular, that was of a National Science Bowl video where my school won. And you can see that half the team, the team is comprised of 4 people. 2 of them are girls. You know, one of them is a freshman, and she's on the best team of the world, and her name is Anka, and she's doing really well, and she's doing well in physics, and she's going to MIT. And I think her and the other girl who was really, really good at bio, they were like the experts of that team, Catherine. I think they were like the big inspirations for a lot of, you know, girls at the time who were looking to enter the team. And I think personally in my school, you know, we're given a lot of opportunities to thrive. Women are in general, and I think that's very great. I would like to, I would also like to point out another really amazing opportunity is, due to my location, very accessible. I think some people here may know the very competitive AMC 10 competition, which is American math. I think it's just American math competition that people take. It's just really competitive. And MIT has this opportunity called Math Prize for Girls, in which they take the top, I think, 250 girls that score well in this math competition, and then they bring them together to do a separate competition and give them more opportunities for money, prizes, scholarships. I don't know. It was really amazing to be in a room with so many girls that, like, you know, are trying to push the boundaries and survive, I guess.
Yeah, for me, similarly, I go to a competitive school, but it's really interesting just because girls are able to thrive there, but it's interesting because sometimes when a girl, for example, is doing better than a guy in a math class or something, the guy will do those kind of microaggressions where they're like, oh, you were able to do that better than me? Oh, you can code better than me type of thing, where essentially it's undermining the girl, saying that, oh, like, we didn't expect this from you. And sometimes it's even like, oh, you got that good grade, or you did better on the presentation because the teacher felt bad for you because you're a girl. And I've heard those kind of things where it's like, it's almost unbelievable for guys, even if they're trained to think that men and women are equal in STEM, that it's just so hard for them to comprehend.
I also think that in STEM classes, girls are expected to work harder in order to succeed, or take notes, right? If, for example, if you want to find someone who has the notes to your bio class, you probably would go to a girl who has all her shit together, you know?
Yeah, I agree with Ray completely. Like, when you're a girl, it's like you're expected to work twice as hard and kind of like blow out the competition to kind of dispel that stereotype, which made it very hard to enjoy STEM, and is kind of the reason why I left it in the first place. Like, for example, this year I took AP Computer Science Principles, and most of my class was male, which was fine. I mean, you know, there are some subjects at my school that girls are more geared towards, like we said before, biology, and even some with physics, but computer science isn't that popular with girls. But when I struggled with the class, right? And it would be very hard to ask for help from my peers because the men in my class would make it seem like they had to dumb it down for me, not in a way that they wanted me to learn, but in a way that it was like, well, you're obviously, you know, unable to understand this like a regular person. So I'll try to make it so that even people like you know what's going on. And so after having to be in that environment for an entire year, I was like, if I have to deal with an entire industry of men like this who can't accept that I don't understand just not because I'm a girl, but because it's a difficult concept to understand, then maybe it's not an industry that I want to pursue.
I think that's the general vibe for computer science in general. Like, you have these really, really aloof people who don't want to talk to you, and I think that's a turnoff for a lot of people who want to get. This is the reason I think that people don't want to breach computer science, because they're not computer people, but it's because people who are really into computer science are really closed off, and people who think they're not computer people don't realize that there's like a bunch of different ways to enter the field of computer science, and it's
Yeah.
really broad in that way.
Yeah, definitely. Even though I am like a super big STEM person, computer science is super competitive. Like, it's going to be hostile even more than like going to pre-law would be hostile. And like you were saying, like computer science, people who are like computer geeks, they have that stereotype. They're like really closed off. They're hacking in their bedrooms and like they're super closed off. And that's just kind of like the stereotype that comes with being considered someone who's really good at coding. And a really good point was brought up with one of my previous conversations, that a lot of women just don't want to be in STEM because they don't want to be perceived like that, because they want to be perceived as like the kind of dumb, like silly, cute girl. So they're a bit more hesitant to be interested in STEM. And a lot of people said they know like a lot of girls who are like that. And then also kind of bounces back to those girls who want to be in STEM, but all their friends kind of like made fun of them for being in a computer science class.
I disagree with that type of generalization. I know where you're coming from, at least when you're younger, where like you kind of want to be ditzy, you kind of want to be more personable. And I wouldn't say that's necessarily a STEM problem. I would say that's an entire academic problem, where girls who are more advanced, more smarter than their peers are seen as, some might say bitchy, bossy, things like that. That's an attack on women all across the academia spectrum. But I would say that for certain parts of STEM, I would say computer science, let's use that as an example. It's not about not wanting to seem ditzy or silly or, things like that. It can really, and I've seen in my personal experience and with other kids and girls in my class, that it's really just about the fact that computer science isn't something that you can intuitively learn, like math. We all have a basic concept of math, even when we're a kindergartner or whatever. And I would say even things like science, we have a basic understanding coming from elementary school. But computer science is really something that you have to learn from the ground up, and you don't get to learn that until you're like in high school. And so when you don't have that type of environment that fosters that type of learning, and you're in a group of kids, usually boys, that make you seem like you're dumb because you don't have that in intuitive learning, then most likely for girls, it'll turn you off. So I wouldn't say that it's because girls don't want to, like, basically because they want to seem, ditzy. I think it's from different factors.
Okay, comp sci is weird because in a comp sci class, you don't learn anything from people. Like last year I took APCSA. My teacher basically didn't teach me anything. All the peers were asking each other for help, but I didn't have to ask people for help, so I didn't learn the names of anybody in my class, and I didn't know who they were and who sat next to me. And it's a very, very solitary, like, you live in solitude, you're very alone. And the way to go in comp sci is really just self-learning. You have to set a goal, make a project, and then figure out how to do it. Look online, consult like every tutorial ever, but there's no like class that will teach you how to do it. It's very, very self-taught.
I feel like it depends on the environment as well. I mean, for example, in 9th grade, I was in a computer science intro course, and I was one of maybe 5 girls, and then there were 30 guys, which was like interesting because it does make you feel out of place. And I get what you guys like mean about working for STEM, but I feel like at the same time, it depends on an individual. Like, for example, if someone already, for example, for like a good amount of their life has felt alienated or different from everyone else, then being the only girl in that kind of a class essentially just deepens that feeling. But if someone has grown up kind of just used to being different and being more open to criticism and so on, then I feel like it won't affect them as much. So it really varies from person to person.
I mean,
feel like
sorry.
Oh, sorry. I feel
Okay,
like I might have to agree a bit with Ray on this, because just coming from a country where like society's perception of women is so backward that they don't even expect them to work, much less work in such a male-dominated industry, we kind of do see that a lot of the initiative does have to come from women themselves. Like, it definitely is a very solitary process, regardless of whether they have access to these computer science courses or not. And I think that you've brought up some really amazing points about why success and representation in STEM would be especially important for these minorities. And I would want to see you guys talk a bit more about that.
I would say just like go back to Ray's point before. I think what you said before, I'm gonna ask you a question here. At your school, is the only AP, do they offer AP computer science principles, or is it just like intro
There's
course
both.
computers?
There's both.
There's both? Okay, have you taken both?
I did not take any of the intro courses, and I was allowed to take a test that allowed me to skip right to APCSA and take it a year ahead of everybody else, basically.
Okay, so you have like an aptitude for it, right?
Well, anyone has an aptitude for it as long as you work and study by yourself. Because I think, I think the key I understand what you guys are getting at, because I think the key to like surviving in high school in general is just having a really nice support system. And if you are a girl and there are no other girls in your class, then you feel like you just don't have a support system. And even if there are a couple girls, like, what are the chances that they might be your friends? So your lack of support system like gives you a very bad mood and gives you like a reduced chance of succeeding in that class, which turns you off, and then you'll not want to enter the computer science industry,
I wasn't trying to say that. I was more trying to say that how you learn computer science differs from school to school. Like what you were saying before about how it's mainly self-taught. In my case, it wasn't really self-taught. The way that my teacher taught it, shout out to Mr. Tidd, was very hands-on. Like he explained it on a conceptual level, which is why I was able to do well in the class. If I tried to go out and look, and I had to try to look out for how-tos on Reddit and things, I was completely confused because I had to kind of depend on his teaching style. But I wanted to use your case compared to mine to say that how minorities achieve and the emphasis that we should put on that is important, because we need to consider that not everyone is coming from the same background. Like, for example, I know that you and Maham come from competitive schools, but in the school districts that I grew up with, even if you wanted to become good in computer science, you would not have that many clubs after schools. You might not even have a computer science course, to be very frank with you. And that's why I feel like, since things like race are intricately connected to socioeconomic status, that it's important for us to consider the different ways in which we can learn all the different letters of STEM, because it needs to be made applicable to all the different social classes.
Yeah, I think that is a valid point. And I'm also here to emphasize the fact that especially in computer science, the internet has a lot of amazing resources out there that you can just learn from, and they can help you a lot. And there's a lot of opportunities online that you can do. Like, I'm currently working on Tutoroo's FOSS team, and they just allowed me to do it because I wanted experience and I wanted help. So like there's a lot of opportunities for you out there, and they could be online and not specifically targeted towards like gender separation, for example. And in an online environment, you would need less. You would just experience less of that, I guess. I don't know.
I completely agree with what you're saying, Bunmi, about the socioeconomic disparities and differences. So pretty much, like, computer science isn't even a required class in most states and countries. Like, a lot of people normally wouldn't take computer science. But for example, obviously, like, maybe some richer, more competitive schools won't have people get the opportunity to take computer science. But a lot of people, especially like minorities who like aren't able to financially go to maybe a better school, but not have access to take a computer science class or get skills that they need to utilize and learn skills that they need to actually become like a computer scientist in the future or something STEM related. So I completely understand and agree with what you were saying.
Yeah. So like, my advice for that is, if you are in a place where you cannot afford to computer science class, or you really, really want to get into the STEM field and you can't, there's a lot of opportunities on the internet for free, and there's a lot of space for people to help you out if you need to. And that, there's other people that have done it, and then they can do it, and you can also do it.
Yeah.
I've recently been very inspired by a game called Celeste, which is an amazing indie game centered around mental health. It's kind of important to note that the main lead developer, Matt or Maddie, is non-binary. And the fact that it's like, such a touted video game is very, very inspiring to me, as well as the composer, whose name is Lena Rain. She's trans. And I think, she was kind of being treated as a mini Toby Fox, as like, the very, very cool, very complex indie composer. And so I think those two are kind of my role models right now for amazing people to look up to.
That's really awesome. I'll check it out. I know one of my friends told me before that kind of like her teacher who was teaching her computer science class had no idea like what they were doing. And I honestly feel like kind of like Bunmi was saying before, how like she was having a hard time kind of learning computer science and kind of like, and she couldn't really get the help that she needed. I kind of feel like everything kind of like just trails back down to the old traditional perspective that people have of women and men. Because I watched this video and it was talking about how, like, for example, women are given like the typical female related like toys and stuff, or like Barbie dolls and stuff like that, while men are kind of like, from the start, they're kind of expected to start being creative, and they kind of been taught to kind of like pursue this field in a way since they were really young. So what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I remember once when I was in 7th grade, I used to volunteer at this aftercare center. And one day somebody brought in this little circuit board thing. And it was very interesting because it was so much fun to play with, just matching all the different circuits and making the lights go off and things like that. And it occurred to me that day, like, what if you colored it pink and put it in Toys R Us? Like, what effect would that have on whether people would actually, whether young girls or other people would actually be able to see themselves as computer scientists or electricians? Because up until that point, I didn't even really realize what that meant. And I didn't have anyone around me who could be like, yeah, computer science is something that girls can do or that minorities can do.
That's actually really interesting. So, off that story, I have a sister. She is currently going to turn 6, and basically, she loves playing with her toys, and she'll always play with her Barbies. And for example, we were just like talking once, and I was just like, "So, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I was just like giving her options, and she was just like, I think I brought up scientist and computers and something around there. And she was just like, "Oh, that's what boys do." And I was like, "What? Why?" And she was like, I always see that the boy toys are always about computers and science, and the girl toys are more about fashion." And it was, I think, more of like a passive influence, that essentially she was thinking that, okay, because I'm a girl, it's weird if I go into computer science. And maybe like when she grows up, she'll be a part of a more supportive environment that's like, "Oh yeah, computer science." But there will always be that kind of implicit mindset that girls don't necessarily belong in computer science.
I hope that that won't always exist, though. I
Yeah,
hope that at least our children, and I hope it doesn't take this long, but perhaps our children's children won't have to think that much about gender when it comes to their pursuits. I know that in our generation, or at least I'll speak for myself, when I was growing up, I didn't see that many things showing girls become scientists and things like that, in like cartoons and things like that. But I know, for example, like these two kids that I babysit, they are crazy about this show called MC Squared, and it's about these girls who, it's basically all STEM related. They hack into things, they create magic chemicals, all this type of stuff, and they always run to me saying, "Bunmi, I want to become a doctor." I mean, that's like a basic African response to what you want to be when you grow up, but they're always like, "I want to be a doctor, I want to be a scientist." And I hope that for more girls than just them, that is the reality. That's how they think. They never have to think about how they're going against something. They'll just see it as, why wouldn't I want to become a scientist,
I can't believe you would bring this point up. This is Aviva Wildcrats and Annabeth Erasure. When I was little, I could only watch the PBS Kids channel, and I loved Wildcrats and Aviva. She was the inventor, big role model. And, you know, everyone knows Annabeth from Percy Jackson. She wants to be an architect. She makes all the cool plans. And I think Avatar was also a big influence for me with very, very strong, compelling female characters that were very calculating. And I would also like to say that even though, you know, there's a lot of very systematic stuff, there's a lot of support for that now, in that there are a bunch of programs. For example, there's the Math Prize for Girls competition that I mentioned earlier. There are a lot of different STEM, like girls in STEM seminars that I have attended. I think there's called like Pink Mob or something like that. That's like only for girls. And it's like a very high-ranking math competition camp thing. And there's, I don't know, I think a lot of colleges also might tilt in certain specific, like engineering or computer science, might tilt towards women because they want, you know, the opportunity. They want to promote the opportunity for women. So I think there's a lot of hope out there for people, and you know.
Yeah, definitely.
I want to say that the women's situation is definitely better, but I'm not sure if you guys want to talk more about race, because I know we're all over here are racially diverse, so maybe we could go into that as well in STEM.
Yeah, before I go into that, just to add more on to what Ray was saying, so there's a lot of opportunities, like she was saying, and there's a lot of opportunities for just women specifically. So, for example, Code with Clossy, it gives middle school and teen women like a chance to learn coding. And, okay. And also there's Girls Who Code. You can start your own chapter in your school to start learning how to code. So you just have to look for them. Yeah, you honestly just have to look for them. And it could just start from like an hour of code to something that you start as a chapter at your school. And, you know, also YouTube, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm in this Built by Girls program, which is a free online program you can check out where you can meet with STEM, you know, girls and STEM representatives and talk about them, about their careers and how to get connections and how they, you know, so you know that there's someone like you out there who made it.
Yeah, I definitely think there are a lot more opportunities now, but at the same time, like we mentioned earlier, because there's so much media influence that you get, or not even from the media, but just from the toys you play with when you're really young, it's kind of, you won't even be looking for the opportunities necessarily if you're just not exposed to it early on.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I just feel like, oh, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no. I'm going to change the conversation. So you've just finished talking about what you wanted.
Yeah, I was actually about to change it too. So like Maham was saying about race, so I know, like, I don't know about you guys, but when people think of like computer scientists or software engineers, they kind of just think of like a white or Asian male. So how are some other ways that you guys have seen race influence them?
Yeah, I think me being Asian plays a lot of roles in how my parents, you know, my parents were not, they were very supportive of me wanting to go into computer science, and I think that if, you know, I lived in a racially charged family in which the stereotype was not computer science, I would not be I wouldn't be supported or found as many opportunities as I could have, and I think there would be like a little bit more selection bias in me.
I feel like race has definitely played more of a role for me than gender. So for me specifically, like I said before, I've always been interested in medicine. And for my parents, first of all, they wanted me to go to the traditional computer science pathway, and they tried to get me to go there. And because, I mean, as bad as it may sound, all our family friends and all our relatives and everyone we know, like most people went for a major in STEM. So for me, they agreed to let me do a bio major. And when I started exploring psych and I became more, when I started exploring psych, I became really interested in that. And when I brought it up to my parents, they were like, yeah, but who does a psych major? And I feel like it's a bit of a reverse, because for Asians, or at least for me and for the people I know, we are pushed into STEM almost against our will. But for other people, they might not get the same opportunities we do. So I feel like it really depends on the context of whether you are encouraged to go into STEM or discouraged. And I feel like both ways it's not good, just because a person should be able to explore their own interests.
I would
Yeah.
definitely say
Yeah.
that everything you just said, it's like you're preaching to the gospel right now.
Yeah,
Like,
according to
it's
the
crazy.
Asian model minority myth, your immigrant parents will tell you to go into, as an Asian, your Asian immigrant parents will tell you to go into STEM because in order to hold up that model minority myth that STEM careers have the more high, like you make more money out of STEM careers, like being a doctor or an engineer or a computer science software engineer. So it's easier for you to get pushed in that. You're either being forced to push in that direction, or like your parents don't care much about your gender as long as you get to obtain that high math competition or
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with you. And I feel like it's interesting just because I feel like I'm doing in the end what they want specifically. Like I'm going into pre-med and hopefully med school. It's just that I'm changing my major track, which essentially wouldn't even affect my pay. I'm not saying that, okay, I want to completely change careers, but it's just that there's just like that for Asians, there's like STEM or not STEM being like good or bad major. And I've even seen it, like I know people that went into more arts majors, and I'll hear adults being like, oh yeah, she wasted her potential. And I'm just like, okay, like it's so obvious that this racial bias exists for Asians where they essentially have to go to STEM or else they're not considered on the right path.
I
Yeah,
think
I would
this is
even
where
say,
I think this is where my humanities background might come into some use finally. I don't have the conventional Asian experience in that my family is just, all of them are artists. Like my two uncles are in rock bands, my mom is a makeup artist and all that. So I definitely have a very unconventional experience. And because I didn't really feel a lot of the pressure coming from them, I feel like a lot of it definitely was molded from my environment, because as somebody who wants to pursue a pre-law track in the future, I don't really know how STEM has really impacted my life in a way. And I would really want to see how, if I were to pursue a STEM career in the future, how that might change for me.
I would say, just from like what I know, when it comes to the immigration process in the United States, that it makes complete sense why a lot of immigrant parents pressure their kids into STEM tracks, because of the fact that, especially in Asian countries, and I would even say in African countries, that when it comes to priority into getting green cards, into obtaining citizenship, they look towards your educational track first. So if you have a master's degree, a bachelor's degree, you'll be higher up than someone who is seeking asylum or seeking refuge, things like that. And so I'm going to talk personally. My mom is a nurse practitioner, and ever since I was young, she's been pressuring me to do med school, even though, and she always says do pre-med, even though, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure you could do is there a prerequisite for your undergrad when you want to go into med school?
You can do any major.
Which is like, I never understand why, because you will never hear an African parent say, do whatever you want for undergrad, just make sure you go to med school. They always say, do pre-med, then go into medical school, and I don't understand it. But I understand that they think from their perspective, this is the highest degree you can get, this is the most honorable and high paying with a guarantee career that you can get. But going back to what Maxine said, I gotta tell you, I wish I had your family, because most of the reason why I spent so long doing STEM was because my parents would only support STEM-based pursuits. They would drive me to rocket camp and engineering camp, but they would say, I don't think we have time for you to go to an art seminar, or I don't think we have time for you to go to that journalism class. And so, it's forced me to become more self-sufficient in pursuing my passions. But I think that, at least I'll speak from an immigrant child perspective, that the emphasis on STEM, while I think that it's a good thing and that it should be more prevalent throughout minority communities, can also become damaging, especially when it feels as though you have to go across that certain path. I hope for everyone in here who is pursuing a STEM path that they're actually very passionate about it, because the reason why I didn't do it is because it's so much schooling for something that you don't actually want to do.
Definitely.
I can definitely. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. So I was just going to say the movie, girl, I'm Nigerian too, my parents have been pressuring me. Like, I took journalism instead of technology, and they got so freaking mad at me. Like, they went,
Exactly.
and then bro, okay, so my high school has pathways, right? There's a health science pathway, there's this and that. And they didn't even ask what I wanted to go into. I just came home one day and they were like, we put you in health science. And I was like, oh, okay. You weren't gonna ask me or anything. You were gonna okay. So yeah,
Faith,
there's
oh my
definitely that
God.
pressure. And while I don't know about like the immigration stuff and like visa and stuff, but I do know that it has a lot to do with like I can just say from like an African perspective that it's the pride. It's the fact that like humanities majors are just like looked down upon compared to STEM majors. And Africans care a lot about their reputation and their image and how they're perceived. So if you can tell your aunt like, yeah, my daughter's going to whatever college majoring in computer science or majoring to become a doctor. I don't even think my parents even want me to go into like technology. They just want me to be a doctor. So I feel like it's definitely like pride in just how STEM is kind of like perceived to be superior than humanities. That's like why a lot of minority parents kind of push for it. And I also kind of get it because there's like that kind of underdog minorities. Oh my gosh, underdog mentality because minority parents and they've gone through a lot because they didn't have the same opportunities that we currently do, so they do kind of want to push us more, but at the same time, like Bunmi said, it's very toxic at times and very damaging, and people should have the choice and the right to do what they actually love.
Yeah, one time my mom said to me, you don't have to be a doctor, but why don't you just become a biomedical engineer? And that's when I was like, I have to stop talking to my mom about college.
Girl, I stopped. So what did I even start is the question. Like, I just do not like talking about that stuff with my parents. But like you were saying, yeah, like I would definitely am pressured to be a doctor, but I generally do think I'm interested in like biomedical engineer because first of all, I do not want to spend 20 years in medical school, be like 60 years old and still not done with my career.
Amen to that.
Yeah, I'm not no med for me. But all the stuff about like being pressured to have specific hobbies is very like relatable to me. I have an art hobby and a pen paling hobby and some other hobbies that I'm developing on my own because I feel like the hobbies I was born into or like were destined for me, and I don't know, anyone who was born instead of me to my family would have the same forced hobbies, but things I choose for myself are things I choose to do. And I think as for whether I really want to do comp sci, I think it's really flexible. I really like how comp sci gives you the ability to basically do whatever you want. And I like that kind of power. And I see it as a challenge that, I'm flexible and I can work hard and I can do anything if I want.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think from what I know, the developer of Stardew Valley did it all by himself, and he did all like the art, all the dialogue and whatever. So I definitely see comp sci like lending itself to, oh my god, the construction. I definitely see it lending itself to a lot more interdisciplinary stuff.
I mean, indie game hits like FNAF or Undertale or Stardew Valley or like just indie devs are becoming more popular. Support them, and so it gives a lot of small gamers hopes that they might be able to create the next big hit game.
Since we are a mental health and neurodivergence organization, how have you guys seen just like neurodivergence in the STEM career? Anything like that?
Wait, what does that even mean? I'm stupid.
Well, you can kind of take it in a lot of ways, like either how has STEM impacted you, or what are some kind of like ways that you've seen people who are more mentally diverse be discriminated against or something like that. You can take it any way you really want to.
Actually, I think that's interesting if we try to connect neurodivergence specifically to STEM. So, for example, you're connecting someone who may have suffered. I have a friend, and basically, I think this is the best way to explain this. She suffered from depression through probably 9th and 10th grade, and by the end of 11th she was like, okay, I want to go into mechanical or electrical engineering, and everyone was like, oh yeah, no, you can't handle that stress, like you just got out of depression or something. And I feel like I'm not sure, Faith, if you meant that we should talk about how such discrimination plays an effect on mental health, but I'm thinking about how mental health might play a role in the discrimination.
Not really a point about STEM, but mental health is a great factor in humanities, especially art, since people maintain the stereotype that in order for you to create great art, you must experience great struggle and a lot of pain and depression to create something that's great and will connect with people. And I feel like we should start dispelling that notion. You don't need to be sad or depressed all the time to make great art.
Yeah, and at the same time, I feel like for I'm not sure if this is a wide case or if that was a one-time thing, but maybe like for STEM, I've seen a couple times maybe where only healthy, competitive people are encouraged to go there, if that makes sense.
I gotta be honest, I feel like the word healthy and competitive is almost like an oxymoron.
Yeah, I'm
because
competitive,
any
but not
kid-
healthy.
Yeah, any kid who is doing anything, I can't even name them because I'm not in STEM, but any of those haughty-taughty science competitions, they must be spending hours and hours without sleep trying to get the best resume, portfolio, whatever you want to call it, done so that they can be competitive. So
And they must be under a lot of stress.
exactly. But I would say that all these different things, whether regardless of your gender, your race, when it comes to STEM, and mental health, there's a lot of different things that can impact your mental psyche. I would say, and this might be like a pivot, but I kind of want to see what you guys have to say about how certain fields in STEM, I'm going to talk about the medical field, can harm minorities because I don't know if you guys have seen this on Instagram or anything, but I've seen a lot of statistics and I've read up about it, and I've seen this in my own personal life about how minority women, particularly Black women, are more likely to die within medical care, at least in the US, primarily during pregnancy and during delivery. I think it's they are 3.5 times more likely to die during delivery than white women, which I think is actually unfathomable.
Okay, wait. I think this is because when the medicine that is supposed to be applicable for men and women were created, not a lot of women were able to be tested or had input in like the creation of the medicine or discovery of the medicine, I guess. And therefore, because the bodies of women have different potential hormones than men, there's different physical and emotional impacts of the medicine. So
actually, I thought the same thing, but that's actually not what causes it. When it comes to things like pregnancy, and this history is going to go all the way back to slavery. When they were testing different types of procedures in gynecology, they used Black slave women to do so. But they had the thought process because, they thought that Black people weren't the same as white people. So they thought that Black women couldn't feel pain. And so that type of, I guess you could say, old wives' tale still exists within the medical system. And you can still see it in nursing and doctors' textbooks all across medical school. So this rumor that Black women don't feel pain the same as white women or even any other race is what is causing these higher mortality rates. You can see with Serena Williams where she had labored breathing during her delivery of her child, and the doctors wouldn't give her an epidural. They wouldn't give her any painkillers because they thought that she was overreacting. And I'll even speak of my own personal experience. When my mom was delivering me, she asked for the epidural, she asked for painkillers, but the doctors held off. They said that after the doctor came back from his break, that he would give it to her, but she was in a lot of pain. And so he was gone for about an hour, and my mom went into labor, obviously. So she had to give birth to me without any painkiller whatsoever because the doctor decided to wait and to not heed her requests. And so just to think about how my mother could have been like a lot of different other Black mothers where they're not listened to by their doctors because of discrimination within medical teachings. It's a cycle that is becoming very, very, very dangerous, and it shouldn't really exist within 2020.
That is just so disturbing to hear, and that's just, I don't know, I'm just really flabbergasted. That's really horrible.
Yeah, and it makes me hard to think about, when I want to have my own family, if these same, I guess you could say, the same discrimination will exist. I can even say with my sister who gave birth to 2 healthy twins, but she was in a lot of pain during her labor and there were complications. And I have to think, was that added on to because she's Black, or was it just because of her own unique experience? And having to have that thought, that shouldn't be, discrimination shouldn't be a place in STEM, whether it's science, technology, engineering, math, the medical field, whatever. And I want to know what you guys think about how, because we're the future, as our generation, how we can get rid of that, since many of us are going to STEM fields.
Oh, wait, by the way, before we do that, I kind of do want to bring up the point that men are discouraged from becoming nurses. I know that we've mainly talked about women, but I just want to raise this point in case anyone has something to say about that.
Can you kind of go more into detail about why they're discouraged from being nurses? Is it more of like, yeah, just like why? I'm just asking because I don't really know much about the topic.
I don't know very much, and I do not want to speak because I don't have personal experience on it. But I think that is because, you know, nurses was a predominantly female role, and men are not, like, you know, women have always been seen as below men, and so the role of, you know, a woman-dominated field, a nurse, is not something that men do not want to become as men.
Yeah, I get that. I'll definitely do more research about it.
Yeah. But about your point earlier about, you know, how to help.
Oh, I just
people.
wanted to say,
Yes.
I feel like they're discouraged because people traditionally consider nurses as a feminine role.
Yeah, and I definitely also think it has to do with kind of like we said earlier, with the different roles that you can see yourself as affecting what you end up being interested in and what you want to pursue. I think it's much easier probably for men to look at themselves and see themselves as a doctor or a lead surgeon as opposed to a nurse or a physician's assistant, whereas it's much easier for women to imagine themselves in those roles just because of how they've grown up.
Yeah, I feel like adding on to how they've grown up, I feel like it's this idea that this stigma that men are dominant. So if a man is essentially a nurse or a physician's assistant, then he's under, for example, a female, and that might be what they might think to be wrong or undermining, or and so on. And I feel like that's why the idea of a male being a nurse, because a nurse is essentially working under the doctor, and people are so easy to assume women to take those kind of roles where you're working under a man, for example, a male doctor, and it might be for awkward, so to say, to see the roles reversed in which the man is working under the woman, which we need to.
But isn't that a problem if, like, as a man, you're threatened by having to work by a woman, and regardless of whether it's a nurse to a doctor or a CEO to an executive worker, whatever? Shouldn't we try to dispel that? It shouldn't matter the gender of your superior.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
also, yeah, and also like kind of just going back to how each gender kind of has the role that they've kind of been defined by. So for example, like Civil War, Revolution, all of that, the only jobs women were allowed to have were being nurses. So obviously, if we just kind of go off of that, then a lot of women generally do steer towards being a nurse, and a lot of guys, just because, you know, generally men have kind of dominated the STEM field, they kind of look towards that area as well. But it's really interesting that men are discouraged from going to become like a nurse and stuff. So it's really interesting to see like what all of you guys are saying.
All right, but about that question earlier, for ComSci, I got you covered. There are a lot of different different opportunities for you on the internet if you can't take it in your local school or you don't want to experience discrimination in your community. There's, you know, online competitions. There's a lot of opportunities for you online, and you can do it. I believe in you. ComSci is like, you know, if there isn't something, then you can make it. You can make whatever you want, and there's a lot of people out there that can help you. A lot of, you know, Stack Overflow guides that you can just look up and then see, you know, people also falling into the same traps as you are and getting out of them.
Yeah.
ComSci is like, you can make anything, as long as you believe in yourself and know how to do it manageably, I guess.
It's good that you bring up online opportunities, because I do want to veer the conversation back to like where you might see STEM going in 5, 10, 20 years, and how this, like in what might be spearheading this change.
Yeah, actually, that's exactly what I was gonna say. But I was gonna add that I think we've been making progress with this. Like, for example, years ago, some women couldn't even dream of getting a job, and now we're advocating for equal pay, and that's going up. Employment rates for women is going up. There are more women exploring STEM, and I feel like that's all because society has begun to bring more light to this issue. And I feel that if we continue to promote awareness around this, promote awareness about breaking such stigma around women or minorities in STEM, then I feel that it'll only get better. And hopefully we'll have a time when the little girl is like, okay, I want to go into computer science, and no one will even doubt her. And I hope that's where we see ourselves in the next 5 to 10 years.
I would advise all of you guys to take advantage of quarantine right now, because the fact that everybody equally is staying at home, which means that a lot of STEM courses online are opening up and being free. Harvard just released a bunch of comp sci courses and other courses as well that you can just take, for example. And this is an opportunity for you to learn by yourself and, you know, start your own journey and do it. I believe in you again.
Yeah. So like Maxine was asking, I'm not sure about, 5, 10 years and so on, but I do know that we're starting to be more progressive and we're starting to make more change just by the people here who are interested in STEM, the different minorities that we are and our different genders, just STEM. And I hopefully like just everything in the world is becoming more inclusive and more diverse. And even if it's just little by little, that's how we're making change. And as long as like we keep that going on, then hopefully in the future, one generation, and as long as we just keep improving each generation, hopefully there's that time where like nobody's worried about what gender you are, about what race you are, or about what anything that you are. You can just do what you want to do.
I would say that, just to like cover, my two biggest discrepancies within the STEM community are I would say the discrimination against gender, primarily the gender gap, and the lack of opportunities for racial minorities, particularly Black people, since that's what I've experienced with. So I would hope that in 5 to 10 years, even though most people entering their undergrad won't even be out of med school by then, but in 5 to 10 years, I would hope to see revisions made to the workspace so that it accompanies for the success of women. And what I mean by that is for allowing things that create the wealth gap but between men and women to cease to exist. One of the things that mainly causes the wealth gap between men and women are things like the maternity leave. The United States does not have guaranteed maternity leave by the government, which is why women who are expected and are almost always debilitated by giving birth and are expected to stay with the child for the first few months of his life have to stand back and just go unpaid, usually within their jobs. And that sets them back not only financially, but also in a hierarchy sense. If you have to be out for a fourth of a year to take care of your child, then you might not be able to raise in the rankings at your job as much as your male counterpart, even if he has a son or a daughter that was previously born. When it comes to racial disparities, I would say, and I've already seen this happening with programs like Code Classy, and other different things I've seen in my school, making sure that different resources like bandwidth, better bandwidth internet within states like Montana and the Midwest that don't have a lot of access to internet, regardless if their citizens can afford a laptop or not. And also in communities like the inner city where they don't have the ability to afford computers and other technologies, so that they have the ability to even begin their comp sci journey or any type of different technological journey. I would hope that at least these two things exist or are being developed within the next 5 years.
Okay, well, pro tips from me. If you want to, about getting a STEM internship, if you are a high schooler, right? You want to get a STEM internship. What you do is you go to specific colleges, maybe colleges near you if it's convenient. You look at the professors that are currently potentially doing research, and then you email them with your resume if you have like a nice chunky resume. And if you don't, you read their papers, and then you find things that are very interesting about them. And probably out of 100, maybe only a couple of them, will respond. I heard it was like a 0.1, like 10% response rate, but it just matters if you get, one person that says yes to your internship request and sees that you're actually interested in STEM, and that's all it takes to keep it going. And that was my method for getting a STEM internship. And I did preeclampsia research on rats. But yeah, you can do it. There's a lot of opportunities out there, and it's harder and they're not as accessible, but because of the internet, they're more accessible now, and you can do it.
And for my international folks, if you're listening to this podcast, I highly recommend, shameless plug, you go to wetech.org. It is a STEM organization focused primarily on female minorities in STEM. They have headquarters in like every single part of the world. And yeah, if you just want mentorship, if you want to like have access to these internships, because I know that we don't really have too many colleges open for student mentorship right now around where I'm from. So yeah, just reach out to them. They'll definitely give you all the resources that you need.
I'll also kind of share some more organizations. So there's Digitize Mentorship, and there's also Achieve Club. They have a free summer program for teaching people Python. So that's really cool. And if you also want something kind of more women specific, there's something called Achieve Club, and also Youth Science Connection. They can connect you with a college professor or a college student, and you can work on a STEM related project together.
Oh, I actually was wondering what your guys' opinion on this is, because I feel like a lot of opportunities are springing up now, and a lot like the ones you guys have mentioned are online. But at the same time, I feel like you have so many opportunities that are online for the people who know about them and for the people who can be actively looking for them. But I wonder if this will end up having almost an adverse effect for people who aren't growing up in places where they feel, or not places where they feel, but they aren't growing up in environments where they've really been pushed to look for these opportunities, or where they aren't, in an area where access to the internet is very stable.
I would say that, like, regardless of whether you're trying to do STEM or not, if you don't have a proper support system, if you don't have proper internet at home, and if you don't have what I would consider basic things that would help you to at least easily find opportunities, regardless of what industry you're trying to go into, that it's going to be difficult. But I would say that at the same time, colleges will take into consideration what type of adversity you have to go through. So I would say that there are things in place to help those who are extremely disadvantaged, no matter what type of career they're trying to pursue.
And I do want to offer some hope, because I do come from a country, and I feel like I can speak out a lot on this. I do come from a country where the vast majority of citizens don't have the digital literacy that most people in developed countries do, and in fact don't really have access to even a single computer within their local areas. I do think that this entire revolution of allowing minorities to speak out and finally gain representation in STEM is definitely adding to some more initiatives to empower these communities with better resources. So definitely we're moving towards a really good place.
Exactly. I just think it's really good that we're all here talking about this, because it's super important and relevant. And it's just great to just get out whatever you want to say. Like Bunmi was saying, just having a support system. And, for anybody who doesn't have a support system, I don't know if you guys ever want to talk, I'm here.
Oh, by the way, kind of unrelated, but my school created a survey because of BLM that the Black people from my school had to report or like talk about their experience as Black people. Do you guys want to see that PDF?
Yeah.
Right. So they're forced to, or like what?
No, they're not forced to. It's just like a voluntary survey where Black people talk about their experiences or microaggressions or ways to improve the system in our.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying like they have to.
They were forced to. They had no choice.
Oh my
God.
No.
But do you guys want the survey data and everything? It's
Yeah,
kind
of course.
yeah, especially like the microaggression section might be kind of cool to look at.
Yeah, but I would just reemphasize the point that for everyone listening out there, whether you're interested in STEM, if you feel pressured to be interested in STEM, or you're like me or Maxine and you're more of the humanities type.
The degenerates.
Yeah, the degenerates that are actually the coolest people in the room. Sorry, guys. I would say follow your passions, and even if you don't know what your passion is, for the life of you, do not do something that you do not enjoy. That has to be the worst mistake you can ever make in your life.
Yes.
Even if you're not doing anything, don't do something that you hate.
Absolutely. And I think in terms of minorities in STEM and women in STEM, I just hope we can get to a point where it's not that everyone feels like they have to do STEM or feels like they can't do STEM. It's just at a point where everyone is like, okay, I like STEM, I can do it. And I don't like STEM, so I won't do it.